Our top story, Minister of Higher Education and Training, Bladen Nzimande, has called for a thorough investigation into a bungle that saw a student at Walter Sisulu University receive 14 million rand in her account. Natasha Piri reports.
The National Financial Aid Scheme has made strides in helping underprivileged and missing middle students achieve their dreams of higher education. But the recent allowance error involving Sibongile Mani, a Walter Sisulu University student whose IntelliCard account was loaded with a whopping 14.1 million rand, has caused a stir.
The department issued a statement condemning this. And that is part, not only condemn, as I have said, put in place, investigate, as well as also on our side, just to check how many universities are using service providers and why are they using service providers, instead of seeking to build internal capacity to be able to deal with NSFAS money properly. The investigation also we want must even go to detail. Was this an error really or not?
NSFAS put the record straight, telling journalists that the error was made by a service provider contracted by the university and not the financial aid body.
Who made a mistake, and this service provider, by the way, is not a NSFAS direct service provider, is a Walter Sisulu University service provider. At the end of the day, and the responsibility lies with the service provider who has a contractual obligation to make sure that they disperse money in a particular way. So the state money is absolutely safe. The taxpayers' money is absolutely safe.
Nzimande raised his concern over the fact that the university only asked Mani to pay back the money, not the employer who made the error.
One is a specific one. I was a bit concerned when the service provider says we're going to do all we can to get the money from the student, but was not saying anything about the employee responsible for this.
Meanwhile, the BLF released a statement applauding Mani for being frugal, saying that she should not pay back the money that was spent. While Minister Nzimande condemned the allowance debacle in the strongest terms, he also questions whether the money deposited into Mani's NSFAS account was purely a mistake. Meanwhile, investigations into this matter are underway. For ANN7, Natasha Piri, Johannesburg.
And of course, the lines are open, 011-542-2186. You can join us on social media. In studio, we have Hendrik Makaneta. He is a higher education transformation network member and also an education activist. So we're going to start with you. Good evening, and thanks so much for joining us. I mean, you see on social media people taking the mickey out of it and saying, Mani's ancestors are clearly very active because she got this 14 million rand windfall. But it's more serious than that, especially in light of access to higher education for many of poor South Africans.
Yeah, sure, it is true. But I think from our point of view is that obviously, Sibongile did not do anything wrong. That is the bottom line. And, we don't think that she should really be held accountable for especially using some of the monies that were deposited into her account.
No, but she reported it according to newspaper reports. She reported it to the authorities. So if you say she hasn't done anything wrong, knowing that this was not money that is due to her, the usual allowance is 1,400. It's many zeros away from what she's entitled to. So what do you mean by that?
No, I'm saying that the service provider, particularly the institution, should be held accountable at the end of the day. Because they are the ones who deposited the money into her account. And of course, given the material conditions on the ground, South Africans, particularly students, are suffering. And, if a student receives such a lot of money, obviously, a hungry stomach will not really go to great lengths to try and, reverse or not use whatever that is available.
I'm not sure. Aren't we making excuses, though, for what essentially is criminality and theft? Because we agree that she's aware that this money did not belong to her, having received the stipend for at least into her second year.
Yeah, all I'm saying is that, yes, of course, the nature and character of our campuses is such that our students really do not have. But at the same time, we want to say that, the institutions should have seen these things in advance. They should have monitored these funds in advance to make sure that, such things do not happen. So I'm saying that BLF has already issued a statement, and we really are in full support of the statement by BLF to say that, some of those funds that has already been used. In fact, our view is that she should just be given amnesty.
All right,
she's a young person who's growing, and she will probably learn from the mistakes and that has happened, and of course develop into a responsible citizen in the near future.
All right, let's get a view from Kagisho Mamabolo, NSFAS spokesperson. Mr. Mamabolo, thanks so much for your time. Are you also of the view that Sibongile Mani should be given amnesty and the facility, or rather Walter Sisulu University, write this as a bad debt?
Well, good evening. We are still waiting, as the National Student Financial Aid Scheme, an official report from Walter Sisulu University to provide a detailed account as to what has transpired. So as we speak, we are following what we had in media reports and so forth. So NSFAS hasn't received an official account from Walter Sisulu University. So we can't even begin to pronounce what should happen to these students. And also I must mention that we have an agreement, an MOU signed with Walter Sisulu University as a university that will disperse the funds that they receive from NSFAS. And from the student side, we have an agreement with the student that we will fund her from her first year until the time that she completes her studies. And that amount for her studies has been stipulated in the loan agreement which she signed. So she knows how much her total cost of studies is, and also how much she's paid or she's supposed to receive only for this year. And that is the amount that has been sent to Walter Sisulu University.
All right.
We have not sent Walter Sisulu University 14 million for this student.
All right, Mamabolo, please stay on the line. We have our first caller from the Northern Cape. Opa, good evening to you, and thanks for joining us.
Hello, Cynthia.
Hi, how are you?
Thank you. Cynthia, I don't want to condone anything concerning this student. What I would like to say is that this student, if she was really poor, this man, 800 and something thousand, should have at least been spent by her on her member of the family who are poor. She's one of the poor people according to the category she qualifies. If that is the case, 800 and something thousand is a lot of money. I spent that money, I think, in 4 years to come. I'm working, I'm a policeman. That money that I will earn, I would think I will earn in 4 years to come. But
Yeah.
I don't agree with this student.
So you don't think she's as innocent as Makanita here is trying to portray her, that, because she's hungry, you're deprived, you've never had so much money, you want to make up for lost time, as it were?
I don't think she's a person that...
All right, Opa, thanks so much. He's a policeman calling us from the Northern Cape. In studio, we have Thabo Shingange, University of Pretoria, Deputy President of SRC and Student Finance Officer. Good evening and good to see you. What do you make out of all of this, and what Sibongile Mani had done? But before you respond to that, we have Sabelo from Mpumalanga. Hello to you. Good evening, Sabelo.
Hello. Good evening, ma. How are you?
I'm good. How are you? I'm not 14 million rich, though.
Hello?
I'm 14 million poorer. How are you?
all of us, we wish we were that student. However, let us be honest now. From us as a society, you see, we cannot blame the student. She must not be blamed for receiving this money. If we are to blame the student, it is the way she spent the money, the way we are seeing it as it is being portrayed on social networks and everything.
Should she pay back or not, Sabel?
Sorry?
Should she be made to pay back the money or not?
That is where I'm coming to. No, she must not be made to pay back the money because it was not her fault. It was the fault of the service provider. It was the fault of the university. she must not be made to pay back the money. What we can condemn as society is the manner in which she spends the money. However, if a poor student from a poor background, waking up 1 minute, I am changing organizational T-shirt Monday to Friday, then the next minute I wake up with 14 million rands in my account, obviously I'm going to be shocked. And it is something I'm not used to. I'm going to spend this money.
No, but you have to take responsibility as well. I think Oprah in the Northern Cape, for me, put it in better context that if she was really poor, needed the money to sustain her family, she would have spent it on that, not Perusian weaves to the value of 3,000 rand in lavish parties. Isabella, we're going to have to leave it there. Benjamin in Kokstad, good evening to you.
Good evening, Cindy. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, thanks. I think it shows that the payment system for NSFAS, it's not accurate. That's what I've picked up. Second point is that the student the student also must be blamed, because I believe when they fill this form for application, it's clearly how much is going to benefit from NSFAS. Now, when I do the calculation, I've noticed that the student has used 136 plus a month. So she should have right from there start to maybe investigate, and it can also appear. It's also appear on her account that the money is from NSFAS. She should have been honest, because many students are staying at home because they don't have funds, such that 800,000. I mean, how many students could have paid their fees? I would say the student should pay a portion of what she has spent, not relevant to her fees. That's my view.
All right, much appreciated, Benjamin. Kali and Giyani, good evening to you. What's your view or question?
Yeah, thank you very much, Cindy. Lord, I tend to understand that there are few things that are not done correctly when we look at the funds that are coming from NSFAS funded to the universities. Because the first thing that I need to understand is that the university should know as to how much is it that they are expecting coming from the NSFAS. And then from there, the university itself, out of the funds that they have received, they should know as to how much are they paying to their students, to how many students are going to be paid. So it happened about 3-4 months. So the question is, the monthly basis when they do the balancing, what was it that is happening in that case? So I'm trying to understand that here, it's one of the things that just happened, and you'll find that it has been always happening in this session. Then fortunately enough, this time it was caught like this.
All right, so Kali, we're going to have to leave it there. Giyani is saying that this may not be a sporadic incident. There may be others that are hidden. Sihle in Soweto, I wish I was giving away prizes today with all the calls coming in. Good evening to you.
Hi, Cindy. Good afternoon with your panel there. Cindy, you know what? Let's not kill the nation. Let's not deceive Sibongile. Sibongile did the wrong thing. Sibongile knew how much did she apply for. Sibongile knew that the money that was deposited was coming from NSFAS. Surely Sibongile was also having the numbers for her NSFAS offices. She should have called them to inquire about the money that was deposited into her account. To make things worse, the money that she spent, she did not spend it on her education. She spent it on something else. I believe that she's supposed to pay the portion that was not supposed to go into her account. Let us not kill the nation. Sibongile's integrity has to be questioned. She is not honest.
All right, Sihle, thanks so much calling us from Soweto, the voice of reason, I would say. Thabo Shingange, are you going to defend your colleague or a contemporary saying that, she's not liable?
Look, I think the issue is much bigger than we can anticipate. And I think to blame the student or to look directly at the student is to give off a misdiagnosis to the bigger problem. I think the bigger problem here is the issue of how we have privatized student loans and bursaries and how that becomes susceptible to issues of corruption. And I think that's where we need to interrogate, because this 40 million rand scandal is not the first time it has happened in institutions of higher learning. So there is a scheme of corruption which involves the issues of student finances and loans that we need to interrogate. And the lack of the Department of Higher Education's oversight role on NSFAS and how it allocates funds, that needs to be looked at. To focus on the student and what the student has used the money on, I think we are focusing on something that is not the bigger issue at play here. The bigger issue is how you have 40 million rand unaccounted for in your books. I mean, had the slips not been posted on social media, you'd have no knowledge that the student is sitting with 40 million rand in the particular account. How did your books balance at the end of that first month when you're doing your accounting things with the private service provider in that particular regard? So I think really there's a bigger issue we need to interrogate, but it doesn't take away from, of course, to question the certain things that, maybe the student could have done a bit better. But to blame solely the student, or to look at the student and say they must pay back the money, I think for us, there's a bigger lesson to be learned. I don't think so.
All right, Rema Mabulo, just going back to our callers, saying that on the one side, it could be just sheer naivety and lack of maturity. And secondly, maybe her living conditions having influenced this. We know that she went on a splurge with her and her friends. But again, the issue of having too many hands in the pot or fingers in the pot, that there are loopholes for corruption or manipulation. What is your view? Do you think that the department should revisit how the monies are being dispersed to universities?
Well, as NSFAS, we don't want to get really into the discussion about the spending of the student. I think what is important for us as NSFAS is to reassure the public that the 14 million that was erroneously paid, if it turns out after the investigation if it turns out that money was public funds, that money will be recouped. There's no doubt about that.
So if it's private investor funding, just for clarity, it's not a big concern.
If that money is not money from the public purse, it means that there is no doubt in terms of our system and so forth. The other thing is that I think I should explain how the disbursement process works from NSFAS to the institutions. For the past 20 years or so, NSFAS was giving money to the universities, and universities will pay the students accordingly. And that process was stopped in the past 4 years, where NSFAS is trying to centralize a system where we pay money directly to the student's account, and also paying the institutions for tuition and accommodation. So in the case of University of Walter Sisulu, the student applied, we assessed, we decided on how much she must get. And that goes for every student. And then we sent an advice report to the university with a specific amount that the student must get, and we paid that specific amount. So what the university has to do is to just credit the student accordingly in that manner. So, and after that, they give us a report every month. So NSFAS does not audit books of the university. So even
all right,
if they...
so I'm just saying, let's just go back in this particular case, Yagasibongile Mani, if NSFAS had paid a particular amount to her directly, if I'm understanding you, then over and above that, the service provider of Walter Sisulu University then paid for the other obligation in terms of tuition or whatever it is. Is that what you're saying? That the 14 million came over and above what she had already been paid?
What we are saying is that we gave Walter Sisulu the total amount for Sibongile. And what was expected from Walter Sisulu is that they will credit her account accordingly for tuition, for food, for books, and other things that we advise them on. So if an error crept in where 14 million was paid into Sibongile's account, it could not be the 14 million that comes from NSFAS, because there isn't an advice from NSFAS that Sibongile must get 14 million.
All right, please just stay on the line, Mr. Makaneta. Just a last caller, Sihle, for me, saying that we would otherwise be encouraging a criminality culture where you can get away with spending money that you rightfully know is not yours without taking the necessary responsibility. Second-year accountancy student ought to know better. And anybody of a reasonable mind would also know that you receive money. I'm not trying to even be moral or even Christian about this whole thing. It's just as basic as that.
Yeah, but now the key question is, Sibongile is a student right now as we speak. Maybe the question that we must ask is, where must she get the money from? Now that she's a student, she's still studying, she's not working. I think that we need to be realistic. Perhaps what we could do, we could find a way of discussing with the department, higher education, both NSFAS included as well, to say, perhaps at some point, some sort of community service could go a long way in ensuring that we bring a sort of punishment to the student so that she can also learn from her mistakes and take full responsibility for the money that was spent.
No, sure, granted. I don't think anybody's calling for her to necessarily lose the opportunity to have a higher education qualification, but I think the lesson also ought to be learned. Just stay on please hold the thought. Elias in Pinetown, eThekwini, hello to you.
Yes, Cindy.
Yebo.
Cindy, let me say that the student, he doesn't have to pay any money on back to NSFAS. Of course, the NSFAS, he's got a person who's working, who puts the money to the student's account. And the student, he didn't on himself take the money from the NSFAS account and put to the head account. Now the person who has taken the blame is the person who transferred the money from NSFAS to the student. And the student there's nothing wrong what he did. I'm honestly saying we must be right. The person, if he's not fit for his job, you don't have to employ him. That's how the money is going this way.
All right. Thank you so much, Elias, calling us from Pinetown in Durban. But what happens then to other deserving students that apply based on merit, that they fit the criteria of not being able to afford higher education, and there's no money because there's certain glitches in the system or fraudulent activity that robs them of that opportunity, Tab?
I think, the incident teaches us one thing. It reaffirms the call for free quality higher education. It would have avoided all the mismanagement of funds that come from the side of NSFAS. In fact, there was a statement released by, I think it was NSFAS, if I'm not mistaken, where the argument they were trying to make was that the 40 million rand into the student's account does not disadvantage or does not affect the allocation of funds that went to other particular students. It then begs the question, then what was that 40 million rand intended for to begin with, and how are you going to distribute it if it did not affect me, Thabo, a student at WUSU, in terms of my particular allocation? It would have been a crisis if, for instance, 40 million rand came into my account, and now the student over here has not received particular money because the money has been pulled. But when the student receives and you receive and I receive, and you say that that money does not affect any other student, it raises other serious concerns to say, then what was that money intended for to begin with?
Yeah. Mr. Mamabula, do you have like a discretionary fund where there's miscellaneous spending, for example, as Thabo rightfully puts it, if this is not going to negatively impact other students who are on the beneficiary list, so what was the 14 million rand there for in the first place?
I think the mistake we are doing here is to dissect this discussion without Walter Sisulu here, who have an agreement with Intellimali, which both of them compare their books in terms of what they paid, when and how. No one of you can tell me now that Walter Sisulu said this 14 million, it's a 14 million of NSFAS, or Intellimali that this 14 million is a 14 million of NSFAS. And that's why we are seeking a report from Walter Sisulu. They must tell us that this 14 million is indeed the 14 million from NSFAS. And if they answer that question, then they must say, in that period, what happened to the students who were supposed to receive the 14 million? They must explain that. So until such time that they come forward and say, indeed, this money was a NSFAS money, we can't then begin to jump into conclusion. I mean, what if tomorrow they wake up and they say, in fact, that 14 million was the Intellimali 14 million they were going to later on advance? So what I'm saying is that as NSFAS, our interest here is that the University of Walter Sisulu needs to give us a remittance report into some detail as to how did they utilize the money we gave them from the day they paid the student and how much was remaining and how did they disperse the rest of the money to the rest of the students so that we can find the gap and then we can also make sure that our students are not disadvantaged by this. It is our interest as NSFAS that this debacle does not disadvantage our students.
All right, Rema Mabolo, we're going to have to leave it there, NSFAS spokesperson. And indeed, we had sent correspondence to the university, or the Walter Sisulu University, and still waiting a response from there. But in studio, we had Hendrik Makanita, his Higher Education Transformation Network member and an education activist. And we have Thabo Shingange, University of Pretoria, Deputy President of SRC, and a student finance officer. And you at home, most appreciated panelists, thanks indeed for calling in. We have to take a quick ad break. We'll see you shortly.